Hello and welcome back to another GiantSlayerTV Synergies tier list video. Today our analysts will be ranking each synergy from S all the way down to the C tier for patch 11.24. First off, it does need to be stated that there has been a B patch release that will likely affect the meta. Since it takes time for that development, this tier list will be for the pre-patch meta. That said, we will make it clear which synergies are most affected by the patch and how that may change their position in the meta. Aside from that, our rankings are always based around consistency and presence in the meta. Let's go ahead and get started. Before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our GiantSlayerTV social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. Starting off our tier list is the best of the best with the S tier synergies. This tier consists of Mutant, Bruiser, Glutton, Enchanter, Socialite, and Protector. These are the traits most commonly played throughout the meta, either as main synergies for a carry or as a splash trait for increased utility. Bottom line, they're super good. At the top of the S tier, we have Mutant. Mutant fields multiple champions that are doing well in the meta, namely Cho'Gath, Kog'Maw, and Kassadin. Mundo, Kai'Sa, and Malzahar are also quite good, but don't define the meta in the same capacity that the other mutants do. Mutations provide a lot of flexibility each game for what type of composition you want to play, and boost the strength of each mutant in interesting ways. But Mutant has also been targeted most by the B patch changes with the nerfs to Cho'Gath, Kassadin, Protector, and specific augments. All of those adjustments will affect the value of Mutant in the meta, and it shouldn't be surprising to see it fall off quite dramatically as the meta evolves. Let's move on to the next trait, Bruiser. Bruiser may struggle against Kog'Maw, and Giant Slayer does do bonus damage against them, but all in all, the beefy frontline that Bruiser provides is relevant all game long. It also buffs the health of your whole board, which is quite valuable. It's worth noting that Bruisers have benefited a lot from Cho'Gath being a top champion, as well as the increased rate at which Ascension and Underdogs are shown up as augments. Now that most of those have been nerfed in the B patch, it's likely that we will see Bruisers prioritized a bit less moving forward, especially since Chemtech has also been nerfed, which makes Mundo and Zac a bit weaker overall. Tahm Kench gets 2 spots in this tier, as our next trait is Glutton. Stacking stats on the top with Glutton makes him one of the best scaling champions in the late game, particularly since you can boost his health, defense, or ability power. Even if Bruisers become less viable in the meta, Tahm Kench with his scaling and strong ultimate is likely to remain a valuable champion for the late game. Next up, we have the 2 most common splash traits, Enchanter and Socialite. Enchanter champions are used in practically every composition, and given Taric is one of them, it often means Socialite is paired alongside Enchanter. The Socialite hex may not always be ideal, but both of these traits provide a ton of utility with just a few units. Definitely staples of the meta, and likely will remain so throughout set 6. And our final S tier synergy is another one receiving a nerf, Protector. Protector's been the frontline for the Kog'Maw reroll build for a while now, but it may not be quite as good anymore post-patch meta. Major downside to Protector is a lack of units, so with the trait and Kassadin being nerfed, we may see Protector fall out of the meta entirely. That said, Scion should still be around, so the trait shouldn't completely disappear. With that, we can move on to the A tier synergies. This tier consists of Challenger, Chemtech, Colossus, Cuddly, Transformer, Innovator, Scholar, Bodyguard, and Assassin. These are the bread and butter of the meta, traits, and champions you will see commonly played alongside the S tier synergies. Alright, let's begin this tier with Challenger. Challenger continues to do well every meta, as attack speed scaling is always one of the most effective traits for auto attack carries. In particular, for 11.24, there's Yone, Fiora, and Samira, with Kai'Sa as a potential carry in the late game. We're unsure where Yone will land post B patch because there was apparently a rather impactful bug that was affecting his clone. To compensate for that, they have increased his base AD and attack speed, but it's truly hard to say whether Yone will be as good in a week or two. Fiora and Samira, on the other hand, are being buffed. This just means Challenger is likely to remain relevant even if Yone becomes less viable. Up next, we have Chemtech, a synergy that's been doing fairly well after the mini rework it received in 11.24. But it seems like it was doing a bit too well, as they're nerfing the bonus attack speed and health regen. It shouldn't majorly impact the Chemtech Bruiser build, though it will be a bit weaker, so it's worth mentioning. Overall, still a solid synergy, but keep an eye on it being lower in priority. From the depths of the C tier, Colossus has risen into the A tier. But this might just be a brief vacation, as a lot of what makes Colossus strong is being nerfed in the B patch. Namely, Cho'Gath, Underdogs, and particularly Galio. If Cho'Gath falls out of favor and Galio returns to being unplayable, where does that leave Colossus? Probably back in the C tier. Cuddly is doing well as always, though we did have to bump the kitty down 1 tier because while strong, Yuumi isn't really meta-defining. She's certainly useful and we recommend adding Yuumi if possible, but not having Yuumi in your composition isn't that big of a deal. Jace with Transformer has also jumped down a tier because of the nerfs to his defense and melee form, and Innovator being slightly weaker in the meta. Still quite strong if you can 2-star him with full items, but not quite as meta-breaking as he was previously. Speaking of, up next we have Innovators. 7 Innovator is still stupidly strong, but difficult to reach consistently. That means we may want to judge the value of this trait based on the other 2 tiers. 3 Innovator still does well with Scrap early game, but 5 Innovators is definitely weaker than before. Combine all of that and the nerfs to Jace, and you're left with a slightly above average synergy that has a high cap to it. We may have been harsh on Scholar in the past because while useful, the mana generation isn't always that impactful. But we've seen enough Scholars in the meta to say that even if the mana gain won't majorly improve your board, it is played enough to warrant a higher spot on the list. Bodyguard went up in value thanks to Galio buffs, but will likely go back down a bit with the nerfs. Braum is still a staple frontliner in the meta, while Leona has taken a bit of a backseat due to Academy being less common and Katarina reroll no longer being a common strategy. Overall, consider this the Braum is strong synergy. And finally, at the end of A tier, we have Assassins. Assassins took a nosedive with Katarina's nerf, but Akali quickly stepped up to take her place. But being a 5 cost, it's not exactly a consistent option to always run Akali every game, especially post B-patch as they have nerfed Akali. Where does that leave Assassins moving forward? We'll have to wait and see how the meta fully develops to find out. Let's now move on to the B tier synergies, which consist of Syndicate, Twin Shot, Scrap, Clockwork, Mercenary, Sniper, Academy, Enforcer, and Arcanist. This tier is mainly about supportive synergies that often accompany those in the A tier. Oftentimes they're either situational or not overly impactful on the game. At the top of the B tier, we have Syndicate. Syndicate has become quite good in the meta, but it does rely a lot on Akali. Throughout the game, there's plenty of relevancy for the synergy, such as the early game Twisted Fate Darius or Braum and Shaco in the mid game. But again, for this trait to truly do well, it needs Akali. And we do have to note the nerfs as both Akali and Darius are getting hit by them. More than likely, where the Syndicate ends up will be determined by how well Akali is post-nerfs, as the Darius change isn't all that impactful. It's hard to say where Twin Shot will end up on a tier list because yes, several of the champions are relevant in the meta. Kog'Maw, Urgot, and Jinx are all doing well. That said, is it really because of Twin Shot? It's definitely doing something, but we're mainly rating Twin Shot based on how well the champions are doing, more so than the trait itself. Especially since 4 Twin Shot is rarely ever played, it likely means the trait itself isn't doing a whole lot for the champions beyond a minor attack buff. Scrap definitely fell off slightly in 11-24, but it's still doing well enough as an early game synergy. What really carries Scrap is the Augment Junkyard, as with that Augment, Scrap is easily S tier. In general though, Scrap is roughly below average since it doesn't have much use beyond stage 3. We really want to like Clockwork because the team-wide attack speed buff is fantastic, but it just doesn't feel like it always makes a difference outside of maybe challenger comps with Camille and Orianna. Jhin doesn't particularly care about attack speed, and while it's useful on Orianna, it's not game-changing. Maybe if 4 Clockwork was viable, we'd bump this trade up higher, but as a 2-piece splash, it's only useful some of the time. Mercenary. Who doesn't love getting a big payout? But how often does that actually happen from game to game? Even though it's not exceedingly difficult to win around with Mercenary, the fact is it's rare to play this trait past stage 3. And a lot of its value is predicated on finding it in stage 2 to then go on a loss streak, win in stage 3 for a payout, and move on. It can certainly be a game changer, but it's a bit too volatile to rate higher on the list. Weirdly enough, Sniper had a massive bug that apparently wasn't all that well known. 6 Sniper gave the whole team bonus damage, but that's fixed now, though it's unlikely anyone ever noticed it since who is actually playing 6 Sniper? In any case, Jhin is doing alright in the meta, as is Kog'Maw, but it's not really because of Sniper. Useful to have for more damage, but post-bug fix, probably not going to win games on its own. How far the mighty have fallen is up next. We have Academy. Academy was nerfed, then they nerfed Katarina, and even Lux. The nerfs have certainly been warranted, but it has left Academy in a not-so-great spot in the meta. It's still useful for Yone and in other situations, but definitely nowhere near its former glory. Enforcer really should be better than it is, because free CC at the beginning of combat is always nice to have. Unfortunately for this trait to truly shine, it needs 4 champions on the board or an augment. There's not a ton of overlap between each champion, so it's rare to ever see that in action. 2 Enforcers are definitely useful, but not useful enough to be higher up on the tier list. And to end the B tier, we have Arcanist. Arcanist was done dirty with multiple nerfs, particularly to Vex, as she was removed from the game. There were some builds utilizing Arcanist, specifically with Victor, but overall the synergy disappeared from the meta. That said, they are buffing Vex, so we may see Arcanist sneak back into the meta. Finally, we have the C tier synergies. This tier consists of Imperial, Sister, Yordle, and Yordle Lord. These synergies are very situational and don't provide a ton of value in the current meta. Imperial honestly could be higher on the list because it has some fantastic augments, but without the augments, Imperial is a bit lacking, even though Samira carry is decent. If Imperial were just less reliant on augments, we'd rate it a lot higher, but as is, it's heavily situational. Keep in mind, Samira has been buffed in the B patch, which may translate into Imperial being more common. Sister is an odd synergy because the buffs to both Vi and Jinx are nice to have, but they don't really matter all that much unless you're doing a weird niche Vi carry build. Neither of them need the Sister buff, which maybe was intended. At the very end of the tier list, we have both the Yordle trait and the Yordle Lord trait. Bodyguard is a joke. We all know that by now, so we don't really need to spend any time talking about him. Yordle's, on the other hand, plummeted in value because Vex was nerfed so heavily. Since she's being buffed again in the B patch, it should help raise the value of Yordles again, but it also may not. The fact is, if you run Yordles, it's a risk. That said, we have seen Tristana do well as a carry, so there certainly is hope for the trait. That's all we have for today's tier list video. We do want to stress that the meta will develop as the B patch had quite a few changes. That said, it really only affects a few synergies in the meta that are overpowered or underperforming, so don't expect the game to change too drastically. Let us know in the comment section below what you think the meta will look like post B patch. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Future Giant Slayer TFT videos.